that allowed them to do that. Of course, throughout history, we can see many examples of this. Mayer Rothschild famously said, you might have heard this one before, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." Now, this is more important than ever for this video right here, because while we're all focused on what's going on in our own nation and our own laws, there's a game being played at a much higher level, which is exactly what he said. Let me control the nation's money. I don't need to control the nation. Let me control the nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws. And like I said, this is more important than ever. We're going to come back to that. Of course, I've referenced this one many times. Henry Kissinger, control the food, control the nation, control the energy, control the region. If you control the money, you control the world. Okay, so that's always been where the attack vector is. Now, that's why, you hear things like, oh, they'll never let something like Bitcoin succeed. But who's they? Who's they? The Fed, the ECB, the PBOC, the BOJ? Like, who's they? Well, I'm going to show you who they are here in a second. All right, now, one last thing. As far as controlling the money, it's a communist idea. 10 points of communism in Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. Point number 5 here is to establish a central bank. The very fact that the United States has a central bank, that's communist. Also, number 2, progressive income tax. Well, we have that in the United States. Shameless plug. I did write the counter to that book. It's called the Uncommunist Manifesto. It's like a little booklet. You can read it in about an hour and a half. I highly recommend it. Of course, it's my book. I'll link to it down in the show notes below. I'll put a QR code on the screen right here. Buy it, leave me a comment on Amazon. Support the work, right? We're trying to support freedom. All right, let's keep going. So real quick, so you can understand how this works, because almost everything we learned is wrong. Henry Ford said that if the American people knew how the banking system worked, there'd be a revolution before morning. They wouldn't wait. It happened before they woke up. So most people have no idea how it works. So let me just kind of preface this a little bit. The banking system is somewhat decentralized. So we kind of have like central banks. So each nation has theirs. In the US, we have the Federal Reserve, you have the Bank of England, you have the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the Swiss National Bank, the Bank of Canada, the People's Bank of China, and on and on and on, right? So all these nations all have central banks. And then under those central banks, then you have like commercial banks. And that would be in the US, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. Internationally, it would be HSBC, Deutsche Bank, Germany, etc. So you have the central banks, and then you have the commercial banks underneath them. Let me give you a little diagram of how this works. So here we have the Fed, or this could be the ECB, or whatever central bank you have. And then underneath that, you have the commercial banks. And this could be Wells Fargo, it could be Deutsche Bank, whatever nation that you're in. And then down here is us. That's we the people. So you and I, we have accounts with our bank. We deposit our money with the bank, and the bank gives us our money back. So we have this trade like this, and the central and the banks, they have accounts with the central banks. That's how this works. Now, the reason why this is important to understand is that the central banks can give bailouts and reserves to the commercial banks, but you and I are customers of a commercial bank. The reason why it's important to have these decentralized commercial banks here is because these banks are the ones that create money. We talk about the Fed printing money and, printer go burr and all those things, and I say that. But that's not really how it works, right? The Fed can give reserves to the banks, but it's the banks that actually create money when they issue loans. So when you take a car loan, a house loan, boat, car, whatever, that money is created into existence. And the reason why it's important to have this decentralized is because if I'm in California and I go to my local bank, my Farmers and Merchant Bank, my credit union, and I say, hey, I want to open an avocado stand here in this local area, that local banker would need to know local information. Is this a good idea to have an avocado stand in California? Well, yes, avocados do very well in California. But if I was trying to do it somewhere else in the nation, they might say that's not a good idea here. And so we want this information to be decentralized. We want it to happen on a local level. We don't want it being done from one central entity. Like if they were the ones making the decision, they don't know what's best for your local area. And what would happen is this could create massive centralization where only the big box stores got loans and all the small mom and pops got edged out. That's the importance of having this done on a local, decentralized level. All right, now let's take it one level up. This is the nation stack. So whether this was the United States or Bank of England or England or whatever nation you're in, this is how it works in the nation. But let's go one level up nationally or internationally. This is a global stack. So now Here we are. This is a nation. This is the US. This is the EU. This is Japan, right? So we each have the citizens of the US, citizens of EU, citizens of Japan, with our commercial banks and our central banks. But then we have these central banks all reporting to this central bank. But who's this central bank? Well, that might be the IMF. And then that central bank reports to another central bank. Well, who's that? Well, that's the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, International Monetary Fund. So really, while we think we're independent here in the US or in Japan or whatever nation you happen to be in, the reality is that there's a big boss up here. And it's important to understand this so you realize that all of the skirmishes that you hear in the US and you're distracted by Trump or you're distracted by debt ceiling limits or you're distracted because Russia and Ukraine are fighting and we're distracted on this level, all of the games are actually being played up here. And everything is leading them to where they want us to go. I've showed this chart before. I know many of you love it. I'll show it to you again here. This is like a organization chart for how the world is. And so up here at the top is that BIS, Bank of International Settlements. They are at the top. Below that is then the central banks. All right, so that's all coordinated by the BIS. Then down here we have these policy makers. So this is like the World Economic Forum, Club of Rome, Chatham House, Rockefellers, etc. These are like the think tanks. They are the policy makers. Then we have the policy distributors, the UN, the IMF. So then the IMF sits there. IPC, World Bank, etc. Then we have the policy enforcers. This is the national government. So you remember, or you might have heard in the United States, for example, we've decided to lay down our sovereignty to the WHO, World Health Organization. So they distribute the policies and the United States will enforce that policy. Down here below, we have the propagandists. This is all mainstream media. And then, of course, down here is you and I, the policy subjects. So you have to understand the game is being played up here. It's not being played down here where you and I are distracted. So now that you understand that framework,